All right, we're back in. We're going into a brand new series on the person of Joseph. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, which Joseph are we talking about? Maybe the graphic gives it away, but you might have thought, if you just heard we're doing a series on Joseph, we're talking about Jesus's adoptive father. That was last month. And now we're going into the life of another Joseph. There's actually 7 Josephs that are named in the Bible, some of them more than others. We're going to go through the life of the one that is named the most. It's one that even if you're newer to church, you might even be familiar with a little bit of this guy's story. I'll make sure you know who it is by giving you a little quiz. I think whether this is your first time in church, you've been around here a lot, I think you might get a couple of these because they've worked their way into culture. Fill in the blank with me collectively. You ready? Here we go. David and Goliath, 1 for 1. Noah and the ark. Moses and the... Yeah, there's a couple answers there. Sorry. That was kind of a trick question. Red Sea, burning bush, 10 commandments. Jonah and the whale. Daniel and the lion's den. And here's the one for today. Joseph and the coat of many colors. Or if you are into theater, you might know it as Joseph and the amazing Technicolor dream coat. He's one of the patriarchs in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. In fact, there's more written about Joseph than there is about Abraham, than there is about Noah, than there is about Adam, than there is about Isaac, other well-known characters in the book of Genesis. His story starts in Genesis chapter 37 and goes all the way to Genesis chapter 50, the last chapter in the book. Let me read you the first 4 verses of Genesis 37 about the life of Joseph. Verse 1, it says, Jacob, that's Joseph's dad, lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel, that's actually another name for Jacob. They're interchangeable. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and they could not speak a kind word about him. So in Genesis 37, we find out that Joseph is 17 years old. He's a shepherd. He's got a father named Jacob, and he's got a bunch of brothers that all hate him. He's the favorite, and he's got a special coat, an ornate robe, or a coat of many colors. And if you ask somebody who's familiar with the Bible, when does the story of Joseph start? They would probably point to those 4 verses. They would probably say, yeah, Genesis 37. That's kind of where the narrative begins to focus on Joseph's life. But here's what I want to know. What happened in the first 17 years of his life? What happened in Genesis 26 or Genesis 31 or Genesis 35 that made Joseph into who he was as a 17-year-old? How'd they end up in Canaan? We learned about Jacob, his dad, but who's his mom? How in the world does he have so many brothers, and why do they hate him so much? What experiences in Joseph's early life formed him and made him this 17-year-old favorite son? Well, Joseph in the coat of many colors has inspired me today to be Joel and the board with many colors. And so I just want to walk you through a little bit of the early life of Joseph so that you can really understand how this boy became who he is. So I'm going to kind of draw a little bit of a family tree. So the first person that kind of fits into this story is actually all the way back in Genesis chapter 12, and it's the person of Abraham. Might be familiar with him. He's kind of the patriarch of the nation of Israel. His wife's name was Sarah. And they, very old in life, were surprised with a little boy. And his name was Isaac. And Isaac grew up, and he got married to a girl named Rebecca. And somebody in this story, a lot of times when you just look at the lineage here of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so on, nobody really mentions this person, but Rebecca had a brother, and his name was Laban. Well, Isaac and Rebecca, they had two boys, twins, actually. And the older of the two twins, his name was Esau, older by, I don't know, a couple minutes. And his younger brother, his name was Jacob. Jacob and Esau, twins. And for whatever reason, Isaac had an affinity towards Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And there was a rivalry between these two boys. You can read all about this in Genesis 25, 26, 27, but allow me to summarize it for you. As they get a little bit older, Esau has the birthright, if you will. He's the oldest son. And also it's expected that Isaac would give Esau his blessing. And Jacob, his name actually means deceiver, and he lives up to it because he tricks his father into giving him the birthright and the blessing, which may not seem like a big deal to you. It's not exactly how it works for us, but man, in that day and age, that's a big deal. It's a big enough deal that Esau, when he hears that Isaac has given Jacob his birthright and the blessing, Esau says, you know what? I'm going to kill my brother. I'm going to wait until my father dies because I'm not trying to do that to him. But as soon as Isaac's gone, so is Jacob. And Rebekah catches wind that Esau is making these threats. And Rebekah, because she loves Jacob the most, she's got to get him out of there. She's got to protect her son Jacob. And so in Genesis 27, this is what it says, that Rebekah told Jacob. She said, "Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. And when your brother is no longer angry with you and forgets what you did to him, I'll send word to you to come back from there." So Jacob actually goes. He goes to this place called Padan Aram. That's the province or the state, and the city is called Haran. And when Jacob makes his way all the way over to where Laban, his uncle, lives, he meets some people at a well. In fact, he meets a girl shepherd, which was kind of abnormal at the time. And one of the girls that he meets at the well, believe it or not, was a girl named Rachel. And Rachel had a sister named Leah. Rachel's actually the younger one, and Leah's a little bit older. But Laban has two daughters. And this is going to sound gross to you, but it was very normal. It was customary. It was common. In an ancient Near East context, this happened all the time. There were marriages even between members of extended families. Because if you think about it, these are actually Jacob's cousins. But our man Jacob has a crush on Rachel. He says, "Laban, can I marry your daughter?" Laban says, "I'll make you a deal." And so Laban says to Jacob, "You work for me for 7 years, I'll give you my daughter." Jacob says, "She's worth it. I'll do it, whatever it takes." And so Jacob works for 7 years in Laban's, farm or whatever he was leading. And at the end of 7 years, the time came for the wedding, and Jacob's about to marry Rachel. And Laban says, I can't marry Rachel away until I've married my oldest daughter, Leah. And so Laban deceives the deceiver, kind of comes back to him a little bit, and Jacob is essentially forced first to marry Leah. And Jacob says, that's fine, I'll marry Leah, but I still want to marry Rachel as well. And Laban says, that's fine, how about 7 more years? And Jacob says, whatever it takes. And so Jacob essentially works for 14 years to get to be married to both Leah and Rachel. All right? So, first comes love, then comes marriage. You know the rest. Then comes Leah and the baby carriage. Man, they start pumping them out. Leah has 4 boys. You might recognize even some of these names. She's got Reuben, the best sandwich. She's got Simeon. She's got Levi, and strong name, Judah. 4 boys are born to Leah. Rachel is beside herself. She's barren. She can't have kids. She's angry with God. She's angry with Jacob. Why can't she give him any kids? Jacob says, I'm not in control of that. Rachel takes things into her own hands. She says, I'm going to hire a surrogate mother to essentially carry my children for me so that I too can have children and carry on my family. And so Rachel gets her maidservant, Bilhah, and says, I want you to carry my children for me. And sure enough, it works. Bilhah has 2 kids. Their names were Dan and Naphtali. Leah says, anything you can do, I can do it better. So Leah says, I'm going to give you my maidservant. Zilpah, she's in. And so Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, she has 2 boys, Gad and Asher. And then, believe it or not, Leah thought she was done. She says, I'm not done. She has 2 more boys, Issachar and Zebulun. And it's like, so in Jacob's house is now 10 boys. You just go, man, the smells. The wrestling matches that are happening in this family. Meanwhile, Rachel, she still has no sons. And if you're looking at this board so far and you're saying, okay, there's a lot about Jacob, there's a lot about polygamy, there's a lot about surrogate mothers, and there's a house full of boys, I thought this series was about Joseph. This series is about Joseph. This is the family that Joseph was born into. Genesis chapter 30, verses 20 to 24. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. And she named him Joseph. Number 11 in the family. But number 1 for Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. Jacob and this big family, they end up spending 20 years. Jacob ends up spending 20 years in Padan Aram with Uncle Laban. Or to all these boys, Grandpa Laban. 20 years. And after 20 years, Jacob says, I think it's time. I think it's time for me to trek home to where my father Isaac lives. Well, Laban, these boys, they all know Laban as Grandpa Laban who rules the roost. He's in charge. Jacob's essentially asking for permission. Can I leave? And at first, Laban says, no, you cannot. I have accumulated great wealth ever since you got here. I am blessed beyond belief. I've never had more cows. I've never had more sheep. I've never had more money. You can't leave. You're the magic sauce, Jacob. God's hand is on you, and you are staying here. And this unwillingness to let them leave peacefully makes a real strain between Jacob and Laban, to the point where Jacob gets Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah and says, hey, we're out of here. We're sneaking out. This is what happens in Genesis 31. It says that Jacob put his children and his wives on camels And he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he'd accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Imagine being 6-year-old Joseph at this point. I don't know for sure, but I don't think if I'm Jacob, I don't know if I'm telling Joseph exactly what's going on. He's 6 years old. Maybe Simeon and Reuben are kind of in on the plan. We're going to sneak out tonight. But probably all that Joseph knows is that Rachel came in and said, hey, you got to pack your bag. He said, where are we going? We're leaving. Going where? Doesn't matter. Pack your bag. Not get in the car. Get in the cart. And I imagine 6-year-old Joseph saying, well, why isn't Grandpa Laban coming? 6 years of his life, all he knows is Grandpa Laban. Why isn't he coming? Rachel and Jacob say, get in the cart. We're heading out. We're sneaking out. So it takes Laban 3 days to figure out that they're even gone. And then it takes him 7 more days to go find them. 10 days. And Laban and his crew finally catch up to Jacob and their big family. And they kind of have a showdown. Laban's kind of trying to get him to come back, and Jacob's like, no, I'm out of here. And they come to an agreement. They come to an agreement that, yes, it is best for Jacob to go and travel back to where his father Isaac is at. And what they do to kind of symbolize this agreement is they build this altar. And so Jacob and Laban and Rachel and Leah and Zilpah and Bilhah, they say to all the boys, they say, hey, we're building an altar. We need some rocks. And so Simeon and Reuben and Levi, they're all, I'm sure, teenage boys. They're probably competing to see who can carry the biggest rock over to the altar. And Joseph, of course, just 6-year-old Joseph is like trying to carry big rocks, probably just a small one. And he's putting it on the pile. He said, what in the world are we doing? Joseph watches this big feast, watches this animal be sacrificed, and this agreement between Laban and Jacob. He's just thinking, why are Dad and Grandpa doing all this? 6 years old. It says that the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. And then he returned home. So 6-year-old Joseph said bye to his grandpa for the last time ever. And I just don't know if anybody was probably telling him exactly what was going on. So he says bye to Grandpa Laban, but guess who he gets to meet next? Believe it or not, they're going to encounter Uncle Esau. Joseph maybe have heard of Uncle Esau at this point, probably not too much because it's not a topic that Dad wants to bring up. The last time they were together, Jacob stole his blessing, he stole his birthright, and he fled from his brother Esau because Esau was going to kill Jacob. So maybe Joseph's familiar with his name, but he's never met Uncle Esau. Jacob, before they get to where Esau lives in Seir, he says, he sends messengers ahead of him, say, hey, go tell my brother Esau that I'm coming, and tell him that I'm sorry, and tell him that I've got so many camels and sheep to give him. Whatever it takes, I'll give it to him. So he sends his messengers ahead. His messengers come back. He says, we told him, but he's not waiting for you. He's actually coming towards us now with 400 men. Jacob freaks out. He panics. The Bible says that he's just totally panicking and in despair. And he starts dividing up his assets so that if Esau catches one area, he might not take the whole family out. He puts a bunch of cows over here, a bunch of camels over here, a bunch of sheep over here. And then on the night before he's supposed to meet Esau, when he knows that he's less than a day away, this is what it says. It says that Jacob got all of his wives and his children together, and he snuck them across the river in the middle of the night to hide them from Esau, just in case Esau had the same intentions that he had the first time around. So again, 6-year-old Joseph, put yourself in his shoes. Rachel comes in and says, get your pillow. He says, what are we doing? It's the middle of the night. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, let's go. And they sneak out in the middle of the night and they cross the river. Joseph's going, what are we doing? I don't know. Maybe they're telling him everything that's going on with Uncle Esau. I just doubt it. I don't tell my 6-year-old what we're doing. And so Joseph's there in the middle of the night, soaking wet, saying, what is going on with my family? These are the experiences that form young Joseph. The next day, Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and then Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Joseph's going, Dad, what are you doing? Why are you bowing down to Uncle Esau? But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And then Esau looked up and saw the women and the children. Who are these with you? He asked. And Jacob answers, they are the children God has graciously given your servant. And then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. And next Leah and her children came and bowed down. And last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau at one point says, who's this? And I can just picture the scene where Jacob kind of puts his hands on Joseph's shoulders, and he says, this is Joseph. And Joseph, even at a young age, I'll bet you he could almost feel the favoritism. I'm sure the other brothers could too. I don't know if they got the same introduction. He says, this is my son Joseph, Rachel's oldest son. Joseph says, so you're Uncle Esau? Esau says, oh yeah. So Esau, after this interaction, he returns home to Seir, and Jacob and this whole family here, they continue on towards where Grandpa Isaac lives. Never met Isaac yet, but where he lives, a place called Hebron. And as they're going there, listen to a few things that happen. As they're heading this direction, there's another woman that's in the picture here. Her name is Deborah. There's not a lot written about her, but what you need to know is that Deborah was Rebekah's nurse, which means that, man, Deborah was Rebekah's right-hand gal, took care of her, and definitely took care of Jacob and Esau when they were young boys. So much so that when Rebekah sent Jacob over to Padan Aram, Deborah went with them. And likely Deborah did a lot of child rearing with all of these boys. She was very involved, and it was on this trip that Deborah died. And based on the very few verses that we get, you hear about her funeral, and you just go, man, this was a woman that was honored, that was incredibly important in Joseph's life. Very sad. But then, believe it or not, Rachel got pregnant again. Joseph's going to have a little brother, a little sister. And so Joseph's just a boy when Rachel's belly's getting bigger and she comes over, Joseph, come and feel. And Joseph puts his hands on her belly and little baby's kicking inside. And then Rachel gives birth to Joseph's little brother. His name is Benjamin. And as Benjamin takes his very first breaths, Rachel takes her last. Rachel dies while giving birth to her 12th son, or the 12th boy in the family, her second son. These are the experiences that young Joseph went through. They finally got to where Isaac and Rebekah lived, and soon after that, Isaac died. And apparently the relationship between Esau and Jacob had been reconciled to the point where Esau actually traveled back for the funeral and the burial of Grandpa Isaac. And so teenage Joseph said bye to one grandpa, buried another one, has a younger brother but doesn't have a mom, has a bunch of half-siblings, has 2 moms that don't like each other and 2 maidservants with... These are the experiences that formed young Joseph. And so you might You might be just wondering, man, like, what's the point? Why did we go through all this? Why are we highlighting these stories, and why do they matter? I want you to see that these are real people that lived in real places, that had real relationships and real family dynamics and real hurt and real pain and real problems and real strife. That this really actually happened. And what you're going to see as we go through this series and as we look at Joseph's life, you're going to see that eventually God is going to use Joseph to save the lives of millions of people. But what's important to note at this point in the story is that he has no idea. He has no idea. At this point in the story, all he thinks is, man, I've just got a crazy family. I titled this message, The Traumatic, Dramatic, Dysfunctional Family of Joseph. Because all Joseph knows in his early years is that his grandpa Laban turned out to be a deceitful and wickedly selfish rich man, that his other grandpa Isaac, earlier in his life, had betrayed his own wife to save his own life, that his father Jacob at one point had betrayed his brother Esau. He's got a mom, a stepmom, 4 other half-brothers. 2 of his brothers are mass murderers. I skipped that part of the story, but you can read about it in Genesis chapter 34. His whole family never seems to stop moving. They're always on the run. They're always sneaking different places. His mom dies while giving birth to his little brother. His dad loves him, but his brothers hate him, and he's 17 years old. And man, if you pitched this storyline to Days of Our Lives on NBC, they'd say, no, it's too crazy. It's unrealistic. It's not possible. And I want this story to come as an encouragement to everybody in the room, because this is a story about the traumatic, dramatic, dysfunctional family of Joseph. And I just wonder if you would say, yeah, there's a little bit of trauma from my family. There's a little bit of drama in my family. There's a little bit of dysfunction in my extended family. Would anybody raise their hand and say, yeah? I mean, you were just with them? If that's you, you just got to know, you fit very well into the Bible. This is not a collection of stories with people whose lives are all put together. The messiness, the complicatedness, the brokenness, man, this is a story about how God can save and rescue and use anybody. If there's alcoholism in your extended family, divorce, abuse, incarceration, strained relationships between aunts and uncles or grandparents or children or siblings, if you grew up in an incredibly wealthy family and that ruined you, or if you grew up in poverty and you're still feeling the effects of it, if you have moved to Ohio because your family is toxic, and I know some of you have, man, the story here and the reminder to you is that God's power is made perfect in weakness, not in strength. You can see the power, the strength, the impact that God can have on a person's life, not when we have it all together, but when you see something that's terribly broken. And if you feel terribly broken, and if you feel like I'm always picking up the pieces of my life, I was dealt a bad hand, you are the perfect candidate for God to use to display His power and His grace to the world. The hardest thing about it is that we've got to hold on and wait and see what happens. Joseph, you're going to find out, had to wait a long time to see how all of these crazy experiences that he had as a kid were going to form him into the person that God would use to impact millions of people's lives. He had to wait a long time. And the reminder to you today is just hang on. Just wait. Just hang on. Let him do what he's doing. Romans 8:28 is a verse that is, it's never on display more than it is in the life of Joseph. Romans 8:28 says that all things work together. God makes all things work together for the good of the people, for the good of people who love him. And that is so different than saying that all things are good, because all things are not good. But God makes all things that are good and not good work together for good for the people who love God. And so if you're here this morning and you're saying, man, I've got a little trauma, I've got a little drama, I've got a little dysfunction in my life, man, you're about to see God make all things work together for good, for Joseph's good and for the people around him. It takes faith, it takes a lot of patience, but that's what God does. And I hope over the next 7 weeks that you will see Romans 8:28 on full display here and on display in your own life.
Thanks for watching. To find out more about our church, about when and where we meet, about joining a group, about serving on a team, about giving online, you can find all of it at threecreekschurch.com.